you talk about this autonomic reflex that you've mentioned several times, is there any science, literature, anything written about this reflex?
Okay, so let's just review what the autonomic nervous system is, right? It's part of this autonomic nervous system or automatic nervous system has to do with day-to-day functioning, right? So, of course, it controls your heart rate, your blood pressure, if we need to sweat, if we need to feel cold, but also controls our level of intimacy with another individual, sexual arousal. I mean, it actually has its hands in almost every function of the human body, right? But because it generally is under automatic control, we're not always so aware of it, right? Until something goes wrong. So, and the biggest way we notice is that that's the way stress, the negative impacts of stress, are expressed through that system. So to use this toy, will you show a little example? So this is sympathetic. Sympathetic has anything to do with increased energy expenditure. So for instance, that would be something, say you're running up a few flights of stairs, so your heart rate would start to increase, your blood pressure might start to go up, you might start to sweat a little bit more. But after a while, those things, after you finish getting up the flights of stairs, then the other system should take over. That's called the parasympathetic and vagal, and that should start to slow things down and return it to baseline.
Okay.
Now, this one's very interesting. This has to do with anything that expends energy. This has to conserve energy. This would be, of course, sleeping, digestion, rest, anything to do with healing states. So for instance, when one goes off, the other one, they'll get shut down. So if we're in this is also the stress response. So the survival response, the fight or flight response. But if we're in this response, then nature says, you know what, I don't want to waste any energy on digestion. For instance, because you can take an example, if I don't get myself out of this dangerous situation, I could become digested. Say, for instance, there's a tiger there, so until we get to a place of safety, shut down digestion. But you could see what could happen if one would stay in that stress or survival. Digestion could shut down for not only for a few hours, it could shut down for weeks, months, and even years. And then we could see all kinds of inflammatory bowel disease or constipation. And that's why when we talk about in unified therapy, that it's so important is that if we could re-regulate this system, the autonomic, somebody that suffered from digestive disease of all kinds could be rebalanced out again.
What about people who take like nutritional supplements and probiotics? Doesn't that supposedly help those kinds of things? And can you talk a little bit about some nutritional?
So of course, there's always things that we want to add to, right? There's all kinds of things that help and add to, but the unified therapy is addressing for, I believe, one of the first times in healthcare, main system. Now, every good scientist and most doctors realize they'll get all these wild figures, but 95% of primary health care and healthcare visits are due to some type of stress maladaptation, right? And to quote Dr. Sapolsky, who's one of the most famous stress researchers in the world, to quote him, he'll say, you could get that fancy heart surgery, you could get that stent put in, right? For that blockage and that bypass, but you know what? It's not going to do a damn bit of good if you don't deal with the stress. Everything else is secondary and the first part is primary. So yes, probiotics, knowing about the human biome, that's important because those are stressors too. Improper nutrition is a stressor. Not having the correct human gut flora and biome, we're realizing now, is a big thing in human health. But if you don't correct your ability to adapt to stressors, nature takes you out of the picture. It's funny the way nature works, because the same thing with food and gluttony, and across the board with nature, she has a program that I don't care if you're a worm, a mouse, a rabbit, a monkey, or a chimpanzee, if you overconsume calories in food, you will get ill, and she will take you out. But she also gives you a big reward. If you don't eat a lot, you can take 2 worms, one worm that you put in what they call more calorie restricted environment, and one that's allowed to eat freely, and the difference is dramatic. The worm that doesn't have a lot of the calories is huge and strong, and we realize the inflammatory disease is cut down and they live so much longer. And the same thing with stress. Nature has a certain rule. If you don't adapt to what the stressor, if you don't change your ways, if stress doesn't push you to evolve, you're out of here. That's the way the program goes.
Is there other ways that people can adapt to stresses besides this process?
Well,
like yoga, for example.
of course, all those are certain tools for adaptation and stress management. But what is so unique in the entire world about unified therapy, we have the first ability to re-regulate stress through an automatic reaction by dumping the most detrimental effect is called allostatic load. Now, what is allostasis? Allostasis is your body adapting to a stressful stimulus. Now, in stress research, there's a classic scenario, and they call this the initial phase is an alarm phase. You first notice there's a stressor, your adrenaline goes up, your blood pressure goes up, your muscles start to tighten, you don't sleep, your intimacy goes down. That's all understood. But within a short period of time, we should return back to this baseline, and that's called homeostasis. The body has a normal reaction of homeostasis. Homeostasis is also when you go out in the cold and you don't have the proper amount of clothing. So what would the body do? It'll start to shiver and shake. Why does it shiver and shake? Because it's burning more energy. And why is it burning more energy? Because it's trying to keep your core temperature at what it should be, right? Because if that isn't, 98.6, if it isn't maintained at that level, critical mechanisms in our body could begin to shut down, and we could die, right? So, and the same thing if we go into the hot. The homeostasis and the intelligence, remember there's an intelligence in the body, and it starts to dilate the arteries on the skin. And we start to sweat, and through evaporation, there's a reaction that begins to cool, and then that blood takes its cooling blood back into the body to maintain the same temperature. Now, allostasis, though, is a different ballgame. Allostasis is your body trying to adapt under a stress response, right? And that's very important because the stresses can accumulate, and those that accumulate over a lifetime is what eventually brings down the bridge. So it's like a bridge. We know today there's a lot of talk about bridges and unsafe and not safe in our infrastructure, and we've seen these stories where, okay, 1 million cars go over the bridge, but then there's just one more, that's the critical allostatic load, and that bridge comes tumbling down. And so what happens, there's just one more and the person's in severe pain, right? Or they go into fibromyalgia, there's just one more stressor. Or we know, say they have to be, it may be a major stressor. A lot of people have to be brought into caring for other people or parents. In fact, they're often used in studies. That stressor, it's very interesting. They don't necessarily feel it when they're actually caring for it. They feel it after.